Do you guys feel that the way that David Deida advocates, quote unquote, dealing with women, as the chapter is called, presupposes an equal footing in a romantic relationship? Or did you feel that it presupposes a type of relationship where the man is running things and kind of managing the woman in a sense?
I mean, it's kind of like asking, who's more important in the economy, the entrepreneurs or the workforce. Clearly both are needed, but one is sort of in charge.
Hello, audience. Are you feeling unsatisfied with your life? Directionless? Wasting a lot of time? Do you feel that life is meaningless?
Did you know that your sperm count is likely 60% lower than your grandpa 40 years ago?
Today we're going to be talking about masculinity, and specifically the book The Way of the Superior Man by David Deida. We're going to be discussing what masculinity is, ways to be more masculine, whether we even believe in this thing called masculinity at all, and how it relates to this thing that we sometimes call femininity.
David Deida is one of the top, quote unquote, spiritual gurus of the consciousness movement, with great insights such as women and the things they say are like the weather, and redheaded women and Latinas tend to be hot-tempered.
Oh, geez. Chris, Kurt, do one of you guys want to jump in and defend David Deida?
It's not hot-tempered. It's hot temperature and cool temperature. Like he says, certain types of women have a higher temperature and certain types of women have a lower temperature.
Pardon me, I didn't mean to strawman his argument.
So I wasn't sure about that part of the book. I mean, it definitely seems like the general idea that he's getting at, that some women are very like intense and in your face, and other women are kind of aloof and calm. I think that kind of goes for men as well. So I'm not sure if there's a correlation between redheads and or Latinas and having a higher temperature, and Asians and blonde women having a lower temperature. In my experience, redheads do seem to be more intense. So I'm using an anecdotal argument there. Maybe that's not enough to defend David Deida, but
yeah, I think it's really easy to misconstrue what he says here, and it does sound a bit strange. And I think this chapter is a bit vague, but I'll just read out the couple of paragraphs so we can get it from the source. This is what it says. Some women are cooling. Being in their company feels like a cool drink of iced tea on a hot sunny day. You might have referred to a woman, for instance, who is an icy blonde or who has cool blue eyes. Other women are hot. They are fiery, tempestuous, and quick of temper. You might have spoken of a fiery redhead or a hot-blooded Latina. So that's what he's saying there. And I still don't exactly know what he means, but I think there's some validity to that. Like women do have different temperaments, and there is something relaxed about certain women and something inherently passionate about certain women or certain people even. So yeah, there's something to that.
I think Chris got to one of the big central issues in David Deida's book. David Deida is proposing that there's a fundamental difference between men and women in temperament, life goals, and even basic spiritual energy. And I should correct myself. He doesn't necessarily say men or women. He says people with a feminine essence or a masculine essence. And in the introduction, he talks about how 80% of men have a masculine essence, 80% of women have a feminine essence, 10% are balanced, and a further 10% are opposite. And he describes the masculine essence and the feminine essence in a lot of detail. He describes how the masculine essence tends to be purposeful, to have a direction beyond intimacy in life, to communicate in a very literalistic, reality-oriented way, and to be a source of stability and grounding and clarity in relationships. Whereas the feminine essence, in his view, tends to be more chaotic, oriented towards relationships, oriented towards children, emotive, and less linear and purposeful. And so, I mean, this is what he says in his book. And what do we think of this?
Yeah, so I think that he's hitting on something that is true, which is that men and women are different, not just physically, but also mentally. And that they have important but kind of complementary roles in the creation and sustaining of life. So yeah, I do think that part of Deida's argument is valid. You know, he goes into a lot of the implications of this argument, and I'm not sure all of those things are equally true. But yeah, I would say I basically agree with the central argument of the book.
Yeah, I'd also say I agree. I'd say maybe not everything in this book is clearly defined, or maybe not everything is the way we think about it in 20 or 50 years. But I think the statements that he's making here will eventually lead people to deeper truths and understanding about the difference between the feminine and the masculine.
I do agree, and it does seem to be true based on studies that have been done and also just life experience that women tend to be more people-oriented and relationship-oriented. And I have observed in my own life that men are more likely to get on a one-track mind about a goal. That being said, I don't think I would frame things in the way that Deida has, and I think that there are some gaps in his analysis. Or I found the way that he talked about masculinity and femininity to be pretty condescending to the feminine, but I don't know that I could construct a detailed argument exactly about why I think that is. It's just my impression.
Can you elaborate on that?
Well, okay. I found that in
argument.
the book he tended to, when he talked about the feminine, he framed it as a source of inspiration for the masculine. And he also said a lot of things that basically, in my view, amounted to when a woman is speaking to you from her feminine, she's not speaking the truth per se. She's speaking out of her emotion in the moment, and you should not be reactive towards what women say. Basically, it seemed like his attitude was that you should be undeterred and unaffected by the substance of what women may say to you at any given time.
Yeah, but I'd like to add that he says that women can also speak in a masculine way, which is just the way that he defines that as, yeah, it's just to the point, and it just says what it means. And conversely, men can speak in a feminine way, which is the style that it's this kind of more ephemeral version of the truth where you're saying what's true, what's emotionally true for you in the moment. And so, but that might not be this commitment that you're making long term. It might just be this very, very intense impression of what's going on currently.
You could replace feminine essence with children and masculine essence with adult, and it would work really well. Like it would scan, right?
Yeah, I think that checks out.
Like stuff like there's passages where he's like, if your woman is in a mood and she's like grumpy at you, then don't try to figure out what's going on. Instead, like lift her up and sweep her off her feet and take her to a movie. And if she says she doesn't want to go to a movie, say it more enthusiastically and she will want to go to a movie. Like that could be a parent and a child. So there is something very patronizing. Condescending is a good word.
Deida's point is that her saying that she doesn't want to go to a movie may not be an expression of whether or not she actually wants to go see the movie. It might be more like whether she wants to go see a movie with you right now because of how she's feeling about the relationship. And so if you can make her feel better about the relationship, then she might change her mind.
The problem for me is that he says her saying, I don't want to go see a movie right now, isn't actually the truth, as opposed to just acknowledging that maybe women have emotional reasons for not wanting to go see a movie with you right now. Like, for example, if I'm really angry with someone, I won't want to go see a movie with them right now because that's relaxing with them and hanging out and having fun isn't on my mind or how I aligned with how I feel about them. So, but it is the truth that I don't want to go see a movie with them. It's not that me saying I don't want to see a movie is false and unrelated.
Right. And I think he's making the argument that it could be true, like right now, but there might be a relatively simple way to get the feminine to change its mind. I don't know if this is true. It seems like it could be true.
There's one aspect of this which I think is really important. So a lot of people talk about this technique or this question. So say somebody comes to you and it seems like they're complaining or they're emotional, they're upset. And a lot of people, especially men, will tend to try to solve the problem. And it turns out that a lot of the time, it's not that the problem needs to be solved, at least not first. What a person really needs is somebody to listen to them. And so if you ask someone when they're upset, well, what do you want me to do right now? Do you want me to help you look for solutions? Or do you just want me to comfort you? Do you want me to listen to you? And a lot of the time people will say, right now, I just want you to listen. Just take on what I'm saying. And then maybe there won't even be a problem after that. So that's really important. And I think it is men who tend to make that mistake of trying to analyze things rather than offer emotional support. And I think that's what this chapter is kind of about.
Well, that's not actually what he's advising, though. Like, he's not advising that the man sit down and be like, hey, what's bothering you? Let's have a conversation. He's advising that the man sweep the woman up into a different and better emotion through the strength of his masculine energy.
It seems like Kurt's method of asking the person, yeah, do you want somebody to listen or do you want somebody to help you analyze? Seems like a debugging mechanism or like a discernment mechanism to figure out whether the person is coming from a more masculine side or from a more feminine side. So that you don't end up dealing with the problem in the incorrect way. It seems like a good strategy.
I don't know. I don't think Deida would like that strategy. It's at once a very analytic strategy, so it's masculine in that way, but at the same time, it's passive. It's just letting the other person control the direction. So in that way, it's feminine. And Deida likes polarities. Like, he likes one person being very masculine and one person being very feminine, and then them coming together and having chemistry. So I don't think he'd like that strategy.
Well, yeah, I think maybe you're right. But also, I think that he would agree with you that masculinity and femininity exist on kind of a spectrum. And so the Kurt strategy of asking the person whether they want to go this way or that way would be kind of towards the middle of the spectrum. Whereas, you could do something that was more feminine than that, or you could do something that was more masculine than that. And so I think, yeah, he would argue that you should find somebody who is exactly your complement and balances your energy out. And I think that's kind of his argument.
Deida would say that two neutral people would have no sexual chemistry, though.
Exactly. Like if they're two people like right on they're both kind of balanced. They're both kind of like the man is kind of both masculine and feminine, and so is the woman. Then yeah, they wouldn't have much sexual energy going on, which seems like it could also be true.
I think in that situation of approaching someone who is in a bad mood, a feminine way of approaching that person, according to Deida, would be to like go in really emotive and like touch their hands and like be like, what's wrong? And like wipe away their tears and just be very like in the emotion with them. Whereas a masculine way of doing it would be to, according to Deida, setting a new emotional direction.
So that is what Deida describes. He basically describes the situation of if she's upset, like sweep her off her feet, distract her. It's kind of like what people describe is a good strategy for toddlers if they're having a tantrum. It's just to distract their emotions and set them on a happy direction. I would like to point out something that I think would also be a, quote, masculine way of handling this situation, but wouldn't be so emotionally manipulative, would be to go in as like a strong source of comfort. Like, say, I see you're feeling bad, like, let me hold you. But specifically in a masculine, stereotypical protector kind of way. What do you guys think of that?
Well, I think it depends on the emotion, because I was sort of interpreting the emotion here as being something where someone's being very like prickly and grumpy instead of like sad. Like if someone was sad, I think that would be appropriate. But if someone's in a negative emotion, that has an element of hostility, an element of like pushing away. Like what if like the guy or the masculine person or whatever tries to like enfold the other person in love, but there's like a I want space, go away kind of thing.
Yeah, that's definitely not going to work then.
In the situation where he's describing in the book, where the guy asked the woman, do you want to go to the movies? I think what he's talking about is a situation where the woman is not feeling anything at all. Like she might just be feeling lazy or relaxed or just neutral emotionally. And because of that, she's not motivated to do anything. And so when the guy gets her a little bit pumped up, a little bit excited, then she feels like doing something. So it's not necessarily that she's sad or angry or something.
I definitely interpreted that situation as she was upset with him.
It doesn't even really matter what the intent was, I guess, because it's interesting to discuss the different scenarios. But I mean, it's an interesting question because like there's this idea in our culture now that's very popular because of feminism that you always respect boundaries. Like if someone sets an explicit boundary, you always respect it. But this book is kind of suggesting that if that boundary comes from a negative place, and we're talking right now about like a mild boundary, like I don't want to go to the movies, or I want you to go away, or is the powerful thing to do to respect that boundary and to leave, or is the masculine thing to do, or is the right thing to do, or is the right thing to do to stay and to push through with love, as Deida describes?
I don't know if I'd call this situation a boundary, because in the situation, all the woman is saying, she doesn't really feel like going to the movies. She's not saying, don't try to convince me, get out of my house or something like that. It's just like, I don't feel like it.
Anecdotally, I can relate to the situation where I'm mildly upset at someone, say a man that I'm dating who's like a more masculine man. And I feel maybe slighted by something that happened before. So I'm a little bit upset. And we're talking about going out and doing something. And I say, no, I don't feel like doing it. And the man applies the strategy of basically just switching up his emotions to bring it into a lighter mood, like putting on some music and being like, come on, and like, trying to dance or whatever. And I will admit that it worked and shifted my emotional state. And I could feel internally that it shifted my emotional state, but intellectually I resented it a lot because I felt that it was manipulative.
Yeah, I guess it depends on the place they come from mentally, their intention behind it.
The intention is to change my emotional state from a grumpy one to a happy one so we can go out.
Right. So I guess my question would be, were you still resentful, later about this? Or were you kind of just like, I'm glad that worked. Now we can move on.
I was still a little bit resentful later.
I don't know. I've definitely been on the opposite end of it. Like this section made me think of a relationship I had where I was dating this woman, and she would sometimes get like really cold and just be like, I don't want to talk. I just want to work. And just like there was like a big emotional wall. And I just sort of respected that. And we didn't interact much for sometimes like as much as like a week at a time. And it didn't leave the relationship in a good place. Like it just sort of felt like the coldness just permeated the relationship. And then like sometimes there'd be like an explosive talk, but I don't think that pattern was positive. And like this chapter made me think, but it's hard because like I have a lot of resistance to that. Because if someone says like, this is what I want, there almost is like a part of me that feels like boundaries should be like sacrosanct in relationships.
I don't think that you should ever force anybody to do something, but I also don't think that just because somebody says that they want X means that their mind can't be changed in a different emotional state. That sounds kind of ugly. But with thinking of an example like, no, I don't want to go out. I don't want to go to a movie. I don't think it's a horrible thing to try to cheer a person up, so they may want to go out, so long as you don't just gloss over whatever was causing the negative emotion in the first place and pretend like it never happened.
So I think a useful way to look at this might be to think about like when a salesperson is trying to sell you something and you don't really want it, and then they convince you and get you to say yes. And I think the way that you feel about the interaction afterwards has to do with whether you're happy with the outcome, basically. So, you know, I've had situations where somebody sold me something and that I didn't originally want, and then I was very happy with it. It doesn't happen as often as like if that happens and I have buyer's remorse, but I think basically the element of manipulation, you know, in the sales situation and in the situation in the book.
It is a little rough because that metaphor is kind of apt for how Deida views it, right? Because it's like if someone is coming to my house and they're trying to sell me something and I'm not sure if I want to buy it or not, like there is like a sense of like cross purposes there. Like we're not in it together. We're two people who are negotiating across a chasm of different approaches, different motivations, different roles, and different levels of investment. I would like to think that's not how relationships are, but maybe that's how they are. I don't know.
Yeah, like when Katie, when you described feeling kind of resentful afterwards, the closest thing I could think of was, yeah, like buyer's remorse. I said yes, but I shouldn't have said yes. That kind of thing.
I didn't regret in this case. I'm talking about a situation where there was a social gathering that we had planned to go to, and something like an argument had me in a bad mood, so I didn't want to go. I didn't regret going to the social gathering, but I resented that I felt like our conflict was swept under the rug.
So he didn't try to bring it up later and say, well, let's try to resolve this, something like that.
Right. And I think that's probably the key there. I can actually, thinking about this issue more, I've been on the other end of it too, not in romantic relationships, but oftentimes like when something bad happens and people get in a negative mood, I don't know, they let something that's already happened bring them down and prevent them from enjoying the rest of the day when there's nothing that could be done. And I'm usually a kind of friend who tries to, in that situation, console, but also encourage them not to let that thing ruin the rest of their day because the negative thing has already happened. And I might employ similar types of distraction tactics if the person seems open to it. And I don't see that as bad or unethical, so maybe I'm being a little bit hypocritical.
Yeah, so maybe it was just what happened afterwards that was the determining factor.
It does seem like there's like a tension between when dealing with that kind of situation, like entering into the other person's reality and emotions versus trying to generate a new reality with the strength of your own, whatever you want to call it, masculinity, personality, character, reality, like generating a reality of your own and drawing the other person into it. Like those are just different approaches. And it sounds like, Katie, you're describing kind of using a combination of the two.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Normally enter their reality first and then try to, through their reality, transmute it into a happier reality. Like if they aren't completely closed off to it.
Yeah, I think maybe the key here is just like consciousness or awareness on the part of the man, the masculine person. Deida talks about how you have to meet her energy with your consciousness, and so I think that the key is that you have to connect as closely as possible with her, like see her emotional state and the reasons for it, and then if you understand her 100%, then you should be able to make the situation better regardless of what it is.
I guess for me, like, for example, if I was dating a man and I was upset at him and we had planned to go to a party and I didn't feel like going to the party because he was upset. If the guy came to me and said something like, hey, Katie, I know that we're arguing right now and we're like in the middle of this conflict, but I think we're both going to have a better night if we can work into a happy attitude, go out to the party so we don't miss the social event, and then come back and discuss the issue later when we're both clear-headed, as opposed to in this emotional space. I think that'll work out better for both of us. And then try to swing it into a happier space so we can go out. For me, that would seem way different than, not just it would seem very different, it would be completely different in intention and in outcome than what's usually happened, and what I also see Deida recommending in this book, which is where you're in a conflict and she's kind of salty at you, so you just sweep her off her feet and do something cute and kiss her on the cheek and take her to the movie.
Well, no, he he specifically says, you know, don't do something if she says no. Like, first you have to convince her, and then she says yes, and then you do the thing. There's an element of consent there. That
he's not dragging her to the movie, but to me in this book, it seems like David Deida didn't seem like the woman's emotional states were reflecting important things that needed to actually be addressed.
Well, so the strategy that you described, like, hey, you know, let's talk about this when we're not emotional. He talks about that in the book, and he says, you know, he mentions, like, sometimes you're in a really heated fight, and the man will say something like, "Come back to me when you're you know, when you're sane," or something like that, or let's talk about this when you're sane, or something like that. And he's basically saying like that's not what you should do. And, you know, instead you should be masculine and interact with the feminine as though it's feminine. And so, like, I would see the strategy that you laid out as kind of what Deida would call the masculine mode of communication.
Katie seems like she's advocating for a mode of relating where the man, or the masculine person, let's just say, where the man recognizes the masculine kernel within the woman and speaks to it, as though the woman, like, was able to, like, communicate in a way that was, like, grounded in reality and rationality. And then maybe followed by a phase where the man gets into the more polarity thing.
Well, and I think maybe this has to do with Katie's specific preference for style of communication. Like, maybe a much more feminine woman would be totally fine with what Deida is suggesting. And maybe Katie prefers a slightly more masculine way of doing things.
Maybe.
I think people need to keep in context that this is a short book, and it's not going to explain every situation with a whole lot of nuance.
I got the impression from David Deida that he was kind of advocating emotional manipulation.
Yeah, for sure.
Not kind of. I got the impression from David Deida that he was explicitly advocating emotional manipulation.
I don't think trying to cheer someone up is emotional manipulation, but it depends. It does depend on the context. So in certain situations, yeah, it could be.
Which, I mean, if you consider your partner to be not as rational as you, and you relate to them in an infantilized kind of way, then you wouldn't approach them as an equal. And the way to go would be for you to be controlling things and to emotionally manipulate things.
Like, going back to the sales analogy, is it emotional manipulation for a salesperson to sell you something that you didn't originally want, but then afterwards you're really happy? I mean,
yes, kind of. Yeah. Sales is like the practice of emotional manipulation.
I mean, even if the person wants what's best for you, like, they literally are just trying to do what's best for you. Like, how could that be seen as manipulation?
Well, it
really depends on the frame of the salesperson. Like, if they're willing to explore and listen to you and hear that maybe actually this product isn't right for you, then that's not manipulative. That's like consultative selling.
Right. Yeah. I guess my point, and I think David Deida's point, is that there's a way to do it right and there's a way to do it wrong. And the difference is you really have to be paying attention. You really have to be tuned in to the other person.
I was going to say, I don't think that's the only difference, because a manipulator, to be successful, would also need to be really tuned in to the other person.
Yes, but being tuned in, there are different ways of being tuned in, which is, I guess that's the deeper point. So if you're listening to someone very intently to figure out how to manipulate them and just do exactly what you want them to do, then that's manipulation. But if you listen to them and take into account what they're saying, then that's not manipulative. And also take into account that emotional level that David Deida is talking about.
Do you guys feel that the way that David Deida advocates, quote unquote, dealing with women, as the chapter is called, presupposes an equal footing in a romantic relationship? Or did you feel that it presupposes a type of relationship where the man is running things and kind of managing the woman in a sense?
I mean, it's kind of like asking, who's more important in the economy, the entrepreneurs or the workforce? Clearly both are needed, but one is sort of in charge. So I think I don't know if that's a good analogy to the masculine and feminine, but it seems like a good analogy.
Oh, I guess that's your answer, because I was asking, like, to use your analogy, do you see David Deida as advocating a boss workforce kind of relationship or a co-founders business partnership and relationships? And it seems like the first.
I mean, clearly the workforce has to be happy with the arrangement. Otherwise it will go on strike.
That wasn't the question I was asking.
Obviously, and I think that's part of the answer, though, because if a woman really isn't interested, she can walk away. So I don't think he's talking about locking a woman in your basement or something like that.
No, definitely not.
No, so your guys' basic answer is he's advocating a relationship where the man is in charge, but the woman is content with that.
Yeah, I mean, he basically
I wasn't implying that he's saying that you should own the woman and it should be like slavery and she should be unhappy. I was just trying to get at, do you think that he's advocating a relationship where the man is in charge?
Absolutely, he is. Yeah, basically, he's saying the masculine's role is to have a mission and a direction, and the feminine's role is to maximize love and intimacy. And I don't think he's saying that the man is going to always 100% embody the masculine and the woman is always going to 100% embody the feminine. But yeah, I do think that central to this polarity that he's advocating as a positive thing is that, there needs to be a polarity, and that one pole is taking stock of the situation and providing direction, and the other pole is sort of takes sort of a more following role. But they could switch places. It doesn't necessarily have to be this like employee-employer relationship or like master-slave relationship or anything like that. I don't think that's what he's advocating.
Right. That's a good.
It seems very parent-child to me. Like the child brings the magic and the fancifulness and the strong emotions, and the parent brings the stability and the direction and the authority. That's how it seems to me.
Well, authority is an interesting word to put there. What do you mean by authority?
Maybe leadership is a better word than authority. As he describes in the book, like the man isn't like imposing his will. But in a way, authority might be the right word. He's setting a direction. He's keeping the feminine chaos in check. And he's the one deciding what the goals are. And he's the one who's the ultimate decision maker when big decisions have to happen. And she supports him in those roles and provides like the magic, which does seem like a kind of authority to me.
Well, but I think it's important to note that the woman could take on the masculine role for certain domains that she's the expert in. So it would just be, the man provides the direction for this particular thing, and the woman provides the direction for this other thing.
I don't know. I mean, I feel like he wants to have it both ways, and you guys too, maybe a little bit. It's like he wants to have it where he's like, yeah, I'm all for equality. I'm all for women's rights. I'm all for women in the workforce. I'm all for women being masculine sometimes. But then he's like writing this whole long book that's like, the man does this, woman does this. Man does this, woman does this. Man is in charge, man makes decisions, woman does this.
But again, and it's important to stress this, he's using man as a kind of convenient shorthand for the masculine.
Well, he's not though. He's not though. He wants to say that so that he's like PC basically, but he's like, there's a whole chapter about like ejaculation, and like it's clearly he's talking about men and women.
He is talking about men and women.
He says that at the beginning
roles as well.
He says, I'm speaking to the 80% of men who have a masculine sexual essence and the whatever percentage of women who also have a masculine sexual essence. He's not speaking to the other half of humanity.
If a man is mostly masculine, then he's going to be masculine most of the time, but it doesn't mean he's going to be masculine in the masculine energy all of the time.
Chris and Kurt, I'd be curious if you guys feel like sharing. Is this how you guys experience romantic relationships?
I remember it was with my girlfriend, or I think we'd already broken up, and she called me and she asked for advice. And it was actually, she said she called me specifically because she didn't phrase it as I wanted masculine energy like I wanted, but she said something like, I wanted someone to kick my butt. And I told her, look, you're going to make this plan and you're going to do this and this and this. And she was like, oh, great. And she felt revitalized by that. And she said she knew if she went to many of her main friends or many of her female friends, they would be like, oh, I'm so sorry about that. Oh, it's terrible to hear that. But she wanted someone to kick her butt. So that was an interesting situation.
I mean, that sounds a lot like what he describes towards the end of the book, where he describes like two man friends being together or two like masculine essence people. Because it sounds like she came to you in a pretty masculine essence with like a specific problem she wanted to solve, and then you responded in masculine essence.
Yes.
So I mean that is interesting. I think that's a good example of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think David Deida would say that, yeah, she was coming to you on basically like a masculine wavelength. If she had come to you on a feminine wavelength, she probably wouldn't have admitted that she wanted her butt kicked.
She probably wouldn't have come to me, especially at that stage, because I wouldn't have had, I didn't have the kind of character that would have been able to support her in that way.
So I feel like I've mostly been arguing against this, and like this issue of polarity and like masculine and feminine energy is something that I struggle with a lot, because I do feel like these roles put the feminine in kind of an infantilizing sort of role. And reading this book, it felt very condescending. Yet, on the other hand, I will admit that in heterosexual relationships, basically, like, typically in my experience, the man being in a masculine role and me being in a more feminine role is a lot of what drives attraction. But usually that ends up breaking down, and that's what ends the relationships in most cases. So I don't really know how to deal with it.
How do you define like a man, or how do you experience a man being in the masculine role versus a man being in a more feminine role?
Fairly similarly to how Deida would. Probably. It's hard to pin down.
Like how would you articulate it to the reader who hasn't read the book, to the audience?
Well, for me, how I would articulate it is usually like, it feels like there's some kind of base, like very deep part of me that likes the feeling of being quote unquote protected or being taken care of, and having like a partner who's pretty firm and solid and consistent in order to be able to balance like more emotional swings and stuff like that. I guess I usually feel attracted to men who have some kind of direction or something really interesting where I feel like I can learn from them, or things like that, and that are pretty stereotypically strong.
Yeah, and you asked about a specific dating experience with this kind of stuff. Like, I haven't actually been in a romantic relationship since I read this book, but it seems like the problems that I had in my relationships could have been solved if I had known more about this at the time. So, for instance, a relationship I had 5 years ago was going great until kind of my my health kind of started declining, and my financial situation got suddenly a lot worse. And that's when the relationship fell apart. And in the post analysis, when I was like, wow, what went wrong? How can I avoid this in the future? The obvious answer was, well, I should have had my life together a little bit better, and I should have had more momentum and more certainty about my life before getting into that relationship. So it was almost like my foundation wasn't sturdy enough to sustain that relationship. It was like my life became top heavy and it like fell over because the foundation wasn't there.
Yeah, I know I've mentioned to you guys before about once or twice, it gets to a certain point in a relationship and a woman starts asking these questions like, so where do you see yourself in 5 years? And if you don't have a good answer, it's likely that relationship is going to be over pretty soon. So I don't know what that is, if that's sexist or what, if it's one thing or another. Just have a plan. Guys have got to have a plan. Or masculine people have got to have a plan if they want to make a woman feel secure.
Yeah, and like for better or worse, it does seem like the burden of being the masculine one in the relationship usually falls to the man. And what that means is that, the man probably has more power in the relationship. To a certain extent. Like obviously he can't abuse the power or else he'll stop having it. But the woman doesn't really need to have a plan, or the feminine doesn't need to have a plan. And so it has more freedom and less responsibility. Although it kind of depends on how you define those things. I'm sure David Deida would say that the feminine has its own set of responsibilities that are just not talked about in this book.
I do want to clarify that I feel like there's a level beyond just like your basic kind of instinctual animal drives, which might kind of color a relationship and influence the level of attraction, as opposed to like actual healthy human to human honest relating. And I don't know. I find them sometimes to feel like they're almost in conflict with one another.
You mean specifically sexual attraction versus relating on a human level?
Yeah, like specifically, well, things like the things that Deida is advocating, what I consider a certain type of emotional manipulation. The things that he's advocating, I do think kind of work and like push certain emotional buttons in feminine essenced people. He's not writing about things that are completely baseless or out of reality. But at the same time, I don't know that that's really a healthy or honest way of relating, where one person is acting, like literally acting, like taking on a masculine role in order to kind of poke feminine attraction buttons and increase polarity to increase attraction, as opposed to trying to connect to what you actually think and trying to understand your partner's genuine concerns in a relationship. Be
But
equals.
hold on, you think in this book, Deida is trying to teach people how to poke women's butts? Is that your interpretation, or do you think that's like unintentionally what he's doing?
I mean, a bit of both. A bit of both, right? Like, I don't think that you could write a book about how masculine men should behave to attract women unless it was based on how to poke women's buttons, because it's not individualized.
So what do you think with the people that get involved in Deida's workshops, like the couples and the people who go to hear him speak and everything like that? Do you think why do you think they do it?
Well, learning how to poke each other's buttons to be attractive to each other and sustain a relationship is a fruitful endeavor.
Okay, but it still sounds strange the way you're framing it, and I don't agree with that. I don't think because poking buttons to me is about manipulating something, and you're making it. You seem to be saying that it's very distinct from relating authentically. However, if you're somebody, if say you're a man and you know how to be a man and you're very content with being a man, and you know the things that these masculine archetypes, or you're on your journey, all these things, then you don't have to cogitate and try to poke people's buttons to get them interested in you. You're just going to interest them because that's who you are.
Well, right. And then you probably wouldn't be reading this book.
Or would you? Because, the kind of people who are good at something do read books to try to get better at it.
I don't know. I mean, I feel like Deida is advocating that men take a lot of active steps towards their woman and towards the world. Like, that seems to be a big part of his definition of masculinity, is not just being and letting things happen, but doing and trying to influence people and influence things in various ways.
Yeah, but that's not what I'm saying, because if you are a certain type of person, then you will take action. So I'm not saying that being and doing are completely separate in this case.
I mean, so have you guys ever like observed a couple that's been together for a long time? Well, first of all, it's kind of rare for me to see such a successful couple. But when I do observe it, there's pretty much always an element of manipulation. Like, both parties have basically figured out how to push the other party's buttons. They kind of manipulate each other. And that's what seemingly makes the relationship work.
Yeah, and maybe it's not all bad. I'm kind of articulating my own struggle with this, because it's like, on the one hand, I know it kind of works and pushes my buttons if someone's taking on a leadership role. On the other hand, I really don't like to feel like I'm being led. And it goes against kind of just a lot of my values. So that's probably where a lot of this conflict is coming from. And other people who may not have the same values as me may not have an issue with this.
Yeah, I was going to say, it kind of reminds me of in My Big Fat Greek Wedding, where they're talking about how, I can't remember what it is, but the father is being difficult or something like that. And so the wife of the father, the mother, says, well, you just have to create the situation so that he feels like he made the decision himself. And then she says, the man is the head of the family, but the woman is the neck, and she can turn the man any way she wants.
Yeah, sure. I wanted to get back to your question about in our own relationships, how does this relate? And I know in the past I've been in relationships with women who to the world seem extremely hard or hard-headed, or maybe they even appear masculine, like powerful, career-driven women. And what I found was, a lot of the time they want that space to be relaxed, like to be led or to be twirled around or something like that. And I'm not necessarily talking about this situation where I like trying to change someone's mood to get them to go to the movies. I'm just talking about a space where a woman is free to be feminine, so she can let go of that masculine part of her that maybe the world demands. And it's freeing, it's liberating for a woman to feel like that.
That's a great segue into what I wanted to talk about. I think it would be interesting to bring a more like historical social perspective into this. There's one thing, like, we've been articulating a lot of opinions that are both feminist and anti-feminist in this conversation. And so that's something I'd be really curious about getting into more deeply. Like, how do we reconcile this sort of perspective with the historical situation we're in, where we're 50, 60 years into this massive societal change where women are entering the workforce and becoming these more active, Deida might say, masculine essence people in the world, versus this idea of polarity that he's bringing up. How can the event of feminism help us inform this model? And how can this model maybe tell us something about the world we're in?
I think that a lot of what feminism was about, at least like the wave that happened in the 50s and 60s and 70s, where women started entering the workforce and being able to determine their own lives, touched on something very real, which is that a lot of women, myself included, really want self-determination and are completely capable of leading their own lives and don't like to feel infantilized or like they're not seen as full adult human beings who can have sovereignty and direct their own lives. So Deida would say that perhaps feminism was kind of about women embracing their masculine in that way, or at least parts of it. Yeah, I mean, I think we can see some effects of that. Like, a lot of women do feel extremely fulfilled in their careers, and having freedom is an amazing thing, and not having society just force you into a certain lifestyle is important. But maybe some women are rediscovering that they don't want to live in their masculine and they do prefer to take on a more traditional role. And we're starting to see certain people choosing to go back to that now.
I mean, it's interesting because second wave feminism wasn't just about women getting into the workforce. Like, there was also a massive focus on the relationships between men and women. And like second wave feminism did talk about how, at least at the time, the relationships between men and women were very infantilizing to women, and male dominance manifested in interpersonal relationships. And you even get some feminists like Andrea Dworkin who argued that the act of sexual intercourse itself was in some way degrading to women or subordinating to women. And you get like this movement in the 70s of women who are in some cases completely stepping back from relationships to men altogether. Like, that's what like the political lesbianism was about. Where women were just like, we're just not going to be in relationships to men. And that didn't work out. But it's interesting because it almost seems like a lot of what the feminists in the 70s were saying is very similar to what David Deida is saying, except they made a moral judgment about it, or they made a different choice, I guess.
Mm.
They basically made the choice that if this is what relationships between men and women are, we're just not going to be in those relationships. At least some feminists made that choice. And then other feminists were like, no, we need to like change it around and figure out how they can be equal. And it seems like that's a big ongoing struggle. It was never really resolved.
Yeah, it absolutely is. I think the majority of people right now are in a mode where they're trying to have egalitarian male-female relationships. And I can't really speak to that. I don't want to say that they don't work. David Deida would say that they're not very sexually charged. But yeah, it seems like there's a few different ways that you could go. You could try to have an egalitarian relationship. You could embrace the duality and try to go for a relationship like that. Or if you're a woman who wants to have self-determination and you could choose to be single, or if you're lesbian or bisexual, you could choose not to engage in heterosexual relationships.
It's rough because it seems like an insight that the second wave feminists and David Deida share is that it's sort of impossible to like isolate one part of your life and to be one thing in one part of your life and another thing in another part of your life. And it does seem to me David Deida, he's, again, I think he almost wants to have it both ways, but it seems like one sort of facile solution might be like a little bit what Chris described, where it's like, oh, well, she's, I don't know how you put it, like a tiger in the boardroom, but a lady in the bedroom, that kind of thing, where like she could be masculine in her life, but at home she'll be super feminine. But it seems like it's rough. Like I'm not totally convinced that it's possible to have these relationships where there is sort of this polarity where the man is taking on this more extremely masculine role and the woman is taking on a very feminine role, but then in the rest of life, everything's egalitarian and equal. Go ahead.
I don't see why you couldn't have that dichotomy between your behavior outside your relationship and your behavior inside your relationship. But I do think that if you want to allow that polarity to enter into your relationship, it's hard to keep it isolated to just one area of the relationship.
Right. I mean, so Deida argues that, if the man and the woman in the relationship are both kind of equally masculine and feminine, that there will be almost no sexual element to the relationship, and that sexual attraction comes from deep differences between the partners.
I don't know if someone can just be like one thing in one part of life and a different thing in a different part of life. Like, it just seems like that's something about what integrity is that you're the same person no matter where you go. And it just seems to me like if you're in a relationship where it's just you're living out this like super feminine archetype and like very submissive and like very like flowy, and I mean, for one thing, relationships affect other areas of life because there's practicalities like kids. But it just seems like if you're acting out that role in such a large portion of your time or in such a major way, in such a way that's so embodied, like it does seem like that would seep into how you go out into the world.
Yeah. So I remember what I was going to say to finish my thought, which is that so he clearly advocates that the man should be masculine all the time in all facets of life. He should set a direction for his life. And what did he say? Don't ever change your mind just to please a woman. Make your own decision. I think he would argue that the sexual attraction element is affected by all of the decisions and behavior that you make in your life. I think that's a lot of what he's arguing in this book, that like if you're you could be super masculine like in the bedroom, but if you're not doing the same thing in your life in general, then you'll probably have a lot of problems. And so another thing that he notes is that one of the reasons for the problems in a relationship where the man is not being masculine is that then this forces the woman to become masculine, which she can do, but she isn't necessarily comfortable doing. And this might lead to a lot of turmoil and things falling apart. Because basically he asserts that, a woman is out of her element when she's playing a more masculine role. And so maybe David Deida would argue that this is kind of what happened to Western civilization in the aftermath of World War II. Like basically, the men were off fighting a war, and then basically the women came in and started doing all the things that the men had previously been doing. And so maybe our society is kind of having this household breakdown.
I'm just kind of reflecting on this idea of if you can like separate the way that you behave within your romantic relationship from the rest of your life, and the way that you talked about integrity. I think you can still be a person with integrity while acknowledging that you have both a yin and yang inside you and deciding to express them within different domains. And in terms of bleeding in, like the way that you behave in certain situations, of course, influences who you are as a person and how you may behave in other situations. But if you're a person that has two very different forces within you, I think the most authentic way that you could behave and the way that you could behave with the most integrity would probably be able to being able to act out both of those sides of yourself. And it would be very difficult to find a domain where you could thrive in both extremes at the same time. So it's probably better to separate them.
Yeah, I mean, I think basically all of us have different domains, and I don't think this has changed in recent history. All of us have domains where we are, authoritative and experienced and knowledgeable and confident. And all of us have other domains in which we are less experienced. We like to follow authority. We like to be directed. And, this goes back to, the Second Circuit in the Eighth Circuit model of consciousness, the sort of dominance and submission circuit. Everybody has a place in the hierarchy. And so unless you're at the top of the hierarchy or at the bottom of the hierarchy, then you do have to play both roles. You do have to play the dominant role sometimes and the submissive role other times.
Even for quote unquote, like really masculine men who would be at the top of the hierarchy, everybody has both the masculine and the feminine within them. That's my view. And also that's the view of David Deida. Everybody has that within them. And everybody, I think, in order to be healthy, needs a space where they can express both parts. And even like the very, very masculine men that I've known that like would project basically only a masculine image would have some kind of space where they would release emotion or embrace their feminine. Like maybe that's music, maybe they get really teary-eyed when they watch a movie, whatever it is. Like everybody has some kind of space, but maybe depending on the size of your masculine and feminine elements, you need different sized spaces for both.
And that's where it gets interesting, because you almost there almost seems to be part of where David Deida's project and it's like the feminist project diverge. It's like a big part of feminism is in some ways getting women to behave in more traditionally masculine ways and getting men to behave in more traditionally feminine ways, so like acknowledging their emotions more and stuff like that. And so there seems to be a goal there of moving towards a situation where people are more balanced. Whereas David Deida is more saying like all that balance, like maybe it's great in some ways, but for sexual attraction, you ultimately need polarity. And so he's encouraging men to be more masculine and women to be more feminine and to sort of rediscover their inherent, what he would say inherent polarity, I guess. So how do you guys reconcile that?
Yeah, so I think what Deida would argue is that if you don't have sexual attraction in your relationship, then it's hard to be satisfied in the relationship, and it's hard to sustain the relationship without that element of sexual attraction. And so, your behavior just in your life in general, outside of sexual attraction, your alignment to masculine or feminine or somewhere in the middle, it bleeds into your sort of into the bedroom, as it were. But also the stuff that happens in the bedroom bleeds over into your life. And so it's, I think he would argue that it's at least somewhat important to keep those consistent. Yeah, no, I definitely agree with Katie's earlier point that everybody has an element of masculine and feminine inside them. And both need avenues for expression.
I'd like to ask a different question first, if that's okay, because I feel like we've been kind of taking for granted that we accept that sexual attraction comes from polarity. What do you guys think? Do you accept this idea that Deida has, that sexual attraction definitely comes from polarity in relationships?
I don't think it has to, but it's probably a cool way.
Yeah, I think it's true. I think that Deida would further argue that you should find somebody who is complementary to you. So again, if you're balanced, you should find somebody who's balanced. If you're very masculine, you should find somebody who's very feminine. If you're not very masculine, you should find somebody who is not very feminine. And that's how you achieve balance. But I think he would also argue that more polarity is good. And I'm not so sure about that.
I think you would say that more polarity is like hotter. That like the people in the middle who are both balanced and together might be content, but they're not going to have sex very much. Yeah.
Like, of course, a romantic relationship should not be only based on sex, because then, that's just not a very good foundation for a relationship. However, clearly a good sex life is a very good thing to have in order to sustain a relationship.
I think it's more important than we like to make it out to be.
So one thing about it is I kind of know what masculinity looks like. It's something that's comparatively easy to define, but femininity is something a little more enigmatic. So it's a bit difficult for me to say what femininity looks like. If you take it on a surface level, then you can say like a woman who does her nails or does her hair a lot or something like that, takes care of her appearance or wears pink. But I don't think that gets to the heart of what femininity is. So because it's so difficult, I don't know if I can say that I'm attracted to more feminine women or I'm less attracted if a woman is more masculine or something like that, because it's like a woman can't really deny that she's feminine, so it's all good, I guess.
Well, David Deida talks about the feminine as being this kind of chaotic, inspiring energy that is like nature or like wind or like art or like he talks about emotions, and he talks about that femininity is about filling things up with love, whereas masculinity is about solving problems and creating space and ultimately creating freedom. He says, for example, if you're looking at somebody who has a very masculine sort of space, it's probably going to be pretty minimalist and functional, whereas a more feminine sort of space would be a home that's filled with beautiful things to create a sort of warm emotion or a certain vibe when you enter into it.
Yeah, another analogy I like to think about, since I've been thinking about these dichotomies, yin and yang and all that, that seems to work for me, is breathing in and breathing out. Like masculinity reminds me of breathing in, because it's like you're gathering space and you're creating space basically. And then the femininity is like breathing out. It's like you're relaxing and you're redistributing resources. So one is you're gathering space, and the other is you're building, and then you're gathering space, and then you're building.
One thing this question brings up for me is like, when I look back at my own experience, I do see that sexual attraction often derives from polarities, or at least from contrast, but I don't necessarily see that it's always the masculine feminine polarity. Like, it seems to me that like age difference can create a polarity for sexual attraction, or like a dramatic difference in personality that doesn't necessarily correspond to the masculine feminine axis. And so I almost wonder whether sexual attraction just requires some kind of contrast.
I've experienced I would categorize as two types of attraction. One comes from polarity and contrast, and like typically in a masculine feminine kind of way. And then the other comes from like a deep sense of sameness and shared understanding, so that you can just truly deeply relate to each other and like connect. The one based on contrast feels lusty, and the one based on sameness does not feel lusty, but feels very profound.
But is it less passionate?
It's very different. It's different. I wouldn't say that it's less passionate, but it's completely different.
Yeah, one is based on division, and the other is based on unity. I would say the best thing is probably kind of an oscillation between the two modes, because that's what I always say.
Yeah, I mean, you can have both. Like, and when you have great division, when you have great contrast between people, then sometimes you can focus on what's the same. And when you are very, very, very similar, then sometimes the things that are different can stand out because you're so similar. So you can have both modes within the two modes.
I sort of feel like attraction corresponds to new possibility, and that falling in love is in some ways like identical to the experience of falling into a new way of being, or like discovering a new world or a new reality. Like there's an element of unfamiliarity about it, but maybe part of it is like there's a looking back, like a mirror. Like if someone can truly understand you, then it allows you to see yourself in a completely different way and like to become a different person.
Yeah, no, I definitely want to agree with you about the element of unfamiliarity being a kind of attractive force. I have noticed in my relationships that I prefer the person that I'm in a relationship with to be somewhat of a mystery to me. And I feel like if I just had them all figured out, very fast, then I wouldn't be able to be in a long-term relationship with them, because I would just be like, oh, I've figured you out. You're no longer a mystery to me. And then there wouldn't be that kind of magic element of unfamiliarity. And so I think the attraction would go away in that situation.
But on the flip side, you have to be able to understand each other really deeply in a relationship. Otherwise, you'll end up clashing quite a bit. And I think that the emotional aspects of the relationship would feel unfulfilling if you feel like you can't. You have to be able to get on the same wavelength. Like there's the baseline communication that you have with an everyday person. If you're trying to express, like, I would like to order a sandwich, anybody can understand that. But when you're trying to express your innermost thoughts and feelings, it's a very rare person where you're going to be able to look in their eyes and know that they actually understand what you're trying to express. So if you're going for a type of attraction with a person that's very, very different from you, it's hard to find a balance of like finding a person that's different enough and polar enough to attract you, but has some kind of similar wavelength to where you can actually connect.
Yeah, I would say that I would definitely agree with that, that basically there needs to be, like, too much unfamiliarity can be a bad thing. Too much familiarity can be a bad thing because then there's no mystery. Too much unfamiliarity can be a bad thing because then there's no understanding, and it seems like you're just in two different universes and you're not communicating, and then you can't have a relationship like that either. I think the important thing is that you feel like you're making progress, right? Like sometimes you feel like you oscillate. Sometimes you feel like, oh, you're a complete mystery to me, and that's great, and I'm curious because I want to figure you out. And so sometimes you feel like that, and other times you feel like, oh, I understand you perfectly, and we're like telepathic, and we're like having the same thoughts and stuff. And so I think if you spend 100% of your relationship time in either one of those modes, then it would start to kind of fall apart. But I think it's important to kind of always feel like you're making progress towards deeper and deeper familiarity. But I think, again, it's also important that there's always an element of unfamiliarity. So I think, I think it should be a wave.
I was going to say, this is where we kind of cycle back to masculine and feminine, because like Jordan Peterson describes the divine masculine as the domain of what is known, and the divine feminine as the domain of the divine feminine as the domain of what is unknown. And so the idea is that the individual cycles back and forth between the two. Like you want to live mostly in what is known because it provides stability and communication and understanding and all the gifts of the known, and you want to go into the unknown for divine inspiration and creativity and possibility.
Yeah, and to add to that, I think it was either Robert Anton Wilson or Timothy Leary who talked about how, and of course Jordan Peterson talks about this, how the right brain is more feminine because it's constantly on the lookout for predators. So that's what Leary said. I think he was saying basically the right hemisphere of the brain is on the lookout for predators, and the left hemisphere of the brain is on the lookout for prey. And so the left hemisphere deals with, this is my domain. This is I know everything in this domain. So everything is known for the left hemisphere, and for the right hemisphere, this is for domains that are basically, it's somebody else's domain, or this is a domain that's very unfamiliar to me. So yeah, I think both of those polarities go to the core of humanity and life itself.
Well, that's kind of the question I have, is like, because I was saying before that I could see other polarities that, like, maybe it's just contrast, not this masculine feminine polarity, and this masculine feminine polarity is just one specific type of contrast that creates attraction. But I can see different ways of looking at it. Like, I can see different ways of looking at it. Like, there's all these different kinds of contrasts, and masculine and feminine is one of them. Or I can see a way of looking at it like there's masculine and feminine, and all the other types of contrasts can ultimately be boiled down to that. Like if you dig deep enough, basically. And so it's a question of how fundamental is this masculine feminine polarity really?
Right. I mean, to some extent, we're looking at archetypes, and whenever you do that, you're having to kind of draw analogies between things that are kind of a stretch.
Well, do
But I definitely
people
think
think it exists? So do people think there's this masculine feminine polarity, or that it's at the level of archetypes? Sorry, go ahead, Chris. I think you're about to answer the question.
yeah, absolutely. I would say that the masculine and feminine are definitely deep within our genetic code and deep within our psyche. And by deep, I mean going back a very long time in evolution, back to, whenever we started reproducing sexually, there's been at least an element of male and female present in our genetics. But archetypally, could you find, do animals think about archetypes? I would imagine that probably unconsciously in there somewhere they do, and they have these masculine and feminine divides as well. So yeah, I would say it exists, and yeah, I would say it's very deep.
For me, without a doubt, it exists, and it's extremely deep. Like, we're a sexually dimorphous species, and every single one of us exists at some point because of the union of a man and a woman. Whether all of the traits that we assign to masculine and all the traits that we assign to the feminine actually belong to the masculine and the feminine is another question for me that I'm not so sure about.
Well, and I think different philosophical traditions indeed disagree about which specific things belong in the masculine and which belong in the feminine. I think even like darkness and light is not necessarily agreed on by all the different cultures that have thought about this stuff. But nevertheless, I think it's important to think about there being a dichotomy. But also, I feel like that mode of thinking, stepping outside of that frame, the mode of thinking where you think, okay, there must be a dichotomy, is kind of masculine, right? Because the masculine likes to divide things, and the feminine likes to join things. So it's very meta. It's almost like seven.
And interestingly enough, like, the more that we move into a feminist worldview, the more that people start to see masculinity and femininity as a spectrum, as opposed to two separate categories. I tend to think that that's more accurate.
Or I guess that the next stage after that is just to see it as just a mishmash of different things, like not organized along any kind of line anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is maximum entropy, right?
Well, it's destruction, but I mean, arguably,
it's disorder. I don't know if I would call it destruction, or maybe
it's destruction of categories. It's disorder, but I mean, in a certain view, like, it's very useful to see categories, even at like the most base level. Our eyes see categories and see objects as distinct objects. But if we actually want to be accurate, none of these objects are distinct objects in the universe. We're talking about lots of different tiny things floating around, playing with each other.
Yeah, and like Vervaeke talks about how that's like a mechanism of creativity. Like, the two aspects of it are you have to roll back your existing constructs and patterns, and then the next thing is you have to be able to see new ones. So it could be a way to free us creatively to create something new.
We both need to break down the gestalt and then build up a new gestalt.
Cool. Yeah, I'm just trying to think of some archetypes off the top of my head that come under masculine and feminine. So the first one that comes to mind is like grandma archetype, like Grandma Ayahuasca, Pachamama, the Earth Mother, that sort of thing. Then there's I guess a grandpa archetype, which is like the supernatural mentor from the hero's journey. Neither of those are really sexual, I'd say. Then there's a warrior, or the humble warrior archetype, and the wife or mother archetype, or even perhaps a witch. That would be a feminine archetype, and those things are, I'd say, they're very linked to sexuality.
Yeah, it's interesting, Kurt. Thanks for bringing that up. It's like I have a friend who has like this big tattoo on her side, and it's like a tree, and it's got like the maid, the mother, and the crone on it, and it's really cool. But it makes me think, like, what you're saying is like the way that we tend to talk about these things is we put a circle around certain archetypes, Like we put a circle around all the ones that are represented by a female, and we put a circle around all the ones that are represented by a male. But it makes me wonder, like, is that really a fundamental, like we could easily also like put different circles around it. Like we could put circles around the old ones, for example. Like how, is that a useful, or do you
Circles
guys,
around the wise ones, circles around the sexual ones, circles around the parenting ones.
You could probably take any of these archetypes and make a male version and a female version. They wouldn't be exactly equivalent, but they might be kind of equally relevant to certain situations, or it's a complementary situations. I think that I do think that there's utility in assigning a male and female gender to particular archetypes. And I think when you do that, you are introducing an element of, like sex or reproduction or something. like if you leave the gender out, then that would kind of like separate whatever you're talking from the domain of the sexual. Whereas if you put in like, oh, this is a male, this is a female, then that kind of, I feel like that's a prerequisite to talking about sexual reproduction.
it's interesting because like in our culture today, I feel like in particular, I think we see a lot of depictions of the warrior archetype as female. I'm not totally sure what my question is, but do you guys think, like, why is that happening? Do you think it's just postmodern neo-Marxist propaganda? Do you guys think there's a purpose to it? Like, does it ring false in a way? Like, what do you guys think?
I think it's happening because there have been so few depictions of a warrior or heroic female in our culture in the past, or at least the recent past, that, well, it is to an extent propaganda. I think it is people with an agenda who are trying to display this on purpose in order to give girls someone to look up to. But I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, just because it is ideologically motivated.
So archetypes have utility because they supposedly tell us useful information that our ancestors learned. And so that information has been carried through the generations through genetics or through epigenetics or through culture. And so I think the important thing about archetypes, in order for them to ring true, I think what that means is that they have some utility. And so if the feminine warrior archetype rings true nowadays, and it didn't before, which I would argue is somewhat happening, or maybe definitely happening, I think that kind of implies that, I mean, yes, maybe it's propaganda, maybe there's somebody with an agenda that's doing it, but also maybe there is real utility in changing the archetype from a male archetype to a sort of more unisex archetype. And I think maybe that reflects the new reality of the new world that we are entering.
For me, it's seeing it on the media, at sometimes it rings true, other times it feels a bit forced. But like, for example, with the Hunger Games, Katniss definitely rings true as a real character to me. And I personally am glad that those archetypes are existing more, because there weren't very many of them when I was a kid. And that was a bit disheartening.
It's interesting because like the character of Katniss has an origin story to explain why she's taking on the archetypal male role. Because like her father died and she had to become the head of the family in his place.
It kind of reminds me of Mulan, where her father is sick or injured or something like that, so he can't go to war. So she does it instead. True.
And that's another one that rang true.
Yeah, so is that actually reaffirming the archetype or the stereotype somehow?
Or at least the masculine-feminine dichotomy somehow?
That's a very good question.
Another one I think rings true for me is in Buffy the Vampire Slayer. The main character is a girl. She's very warlike and likes to kick the asses of various monsters and vampires. I think I agree with Katie that, now that we have women taking on a more traditionally masculine role, women are entering the workforce. I think it is important to have hero's journey stories where the hero is a woman, because that's the reality for women today. Women don't have the same role that they used to have, and now I think it's more important than ever that women go on their own hero's journeys. I'm not sure if that's long term going to be good. But it seems to me that the new world that we're entering makes it so that it is something that should happen.
Also, just a thought. Maybe this is kind of a horrible thought, or at least it doesn't seem like a very savory thought. But one thing that we mentioned in the intro is the fact that testosterone has been declining on average 1% per year since the 80s, and like sperm counts have declined 60% in the past 40 years. And we're talking about the idea of these stories of the girl whose father died. So then she goes on to become a hero. And it's making me kind of think, are we seeing more strong women in response to less masculine men? Oof.
This is actually a great question. We've been talking a lot about women, but maybe let's talk a little bit about what's going on with men in society these days. Do we see feminization, let's say, of men in modern society?
I was just going to say there's the term soy boy, which is a pejorative term for the type of person who eats so much soy they're affected by phytoestrogen and they become more feminized.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely a sort of growing archetype in today's society. I was going to say, so I think the way that one of the things that really propelled the at least second wave of feminism was World War II. Most of the soldiers and people that died were men. And so after the war, there was basically a surplus of women. And so I think maybe you just saw society, at least, Western society, become more feminine as a result of all of those men having died.
Well, you got to remember there was a period in between the 1950s or the post-World War period where you get the baby boom. Like, the reason there was a baby boom is because so many young people were settling down and having nuclear families and pumping out tons and tons of kids. And that was a period that was characterized by extremely conservative gender roles and almost like an attempt to like recapture. It was almost like women had to kind of like go into the factories and like wear the pants, so to speak, during World War II. And then afterwards there was like an attempt by everyone kind of to like regain a lost past, like to get back to the traditional roles, to get back to at least what was understood at that point as a more traditional way of life. And I think for a lot of people it rang very false. And that's why feminism emerged not long after.
Mm-hmm. I mean, basically, you have a situation where historically women have been infantilized. Okay, I'm oversimplifying, but let's take this oversimplistic explanation. You have a history where women have been infantilized, and then World War II happens, the men go off, and the women like rise to the occasion and run society and become more independent. Most of them are working and things like that. Men come back and they want to go back to being in their leadership roles, and women kind of accept it. And you have the 50s, but like women who realize that they are fully capable of being independent human beings and taking leadership in their own lives don't fit well into that box anymore.
Yeah, there was other factors too, like because of first wave feminism, a large portion of women were educated. So you had women with like master's degrees or whatever, like living as a full-time housewife. Meanwhile, the role of housewife didn't require that much. It wasn't that intensive a job as it used to be because of all the labor-saving devices that had been invented. And you had an existing cultural framework of like women already being more sexually liberated and being more living like a woman in the 1950s, like it wouldn't be unusual for her to be like trying to live a very traditional housewife world. But meanwhile, like grandma was a flapper in the 20s and was like, in my day, we went out and lived on our own in cities. Why don't you young people do that? So it's not like it was completely like the 1950s conservatism was a little bit artificial.
Yeah, and another thing that I think maybe led to the feminization of Western society is kind of just when you view World War II as this kind of like cataclysmic, like archetypal event, it almost seems to me like Nazi Germany was this like extreme toxic masculine force, and it was defeated in war. So what defeated it in war? The feminine. So it almost seems like the feminine like won World War II. And now we're basically we're like, the whole world is like ashamed of masculinity after that. I'm not sure if that's a spurious connection or something that's actually happening, but it seems to me like viewed from if you view World War II from like a mythological standpoint, it kind of looks like that.
What do you think is causing this decline in the masculinity of men in a literal sense? Do you think it's cultural or biological, or just to clarify, I have looked into this a little bit, and obesity is something that lowers testosterone rates, but there have been studies that have controlled for obesity, and men's testosterone rates are still significantly lower than men of a similar weight range.
So if you look at the activities that raise testosterone levels, these are things like lifting heavy weights and exercise and competition. Like if you are in a highly competitive situation or a highly like high pressure situation, and then you win, then you have this kind of boost of testosterone. And so I think if you just kind of look at all the activities that raise testosterone and then look at the incidence of people doing those activities, or men doing those activities, I think that we are doing those activities less. And so that's contributing to lower testosterone levels.
There's some schools in Toronto where they don't do group sports anymore because it's too competitive. They just get the kids to do calisthenics.
Yeah, I would venture a guess that lowers testosterone levels.
I was in a soccer league as a child where they didn't keep track of the points, and there were no winners or losers to the game.
Sounds very feminine.
It was co-ed.
But it still sounds feminine, even though like half the participants were probably boys.
Yeah. I mean, we still kind of kept track of the points anyway, but
I think part of the reason for the decline in masculinity is people realize that machismo isn't really going to work anymore. And machismo is a very easy way to characterize masculinity, but it's like a caricature of real masculinity. And without having that, at least the image, real masculinity is something that's harder to imagine for people. And of course, the pendulum swung the other way, and people moved towards things like the 80s and 90s. There were sensitive new age guys, and now we have these soy boys or whatever kind of thing arrives. But it's like we're in that period of antithesis. We haven't reached a synthesis to discover what new masculinity should really look like.
Right. And I think that one of David Deida's purposes with the book is to introduce this kind of synthesis idea of masculinity, where he says, okay, well, we can't go back to the old style version of masculinity where men are just in charge, and we shouldn't. But also this new version where everybody is feminine is also not going to work either. And so this new, I mean, he writes it quite eloquently in the intro where he talks about, so the new man, the superior man is, confident in his direction in life, but also he tries to maximize love in his relationships and things like that, love and awareness.
I guess my question particularly for Chris and Kurt is like we've talked a lot about how David Deida views masculinity, but how do you guys like try to, if this is a goal that you would even do or consider valid, how do you try to foster masculinity in your character without falling into that machismo or Nazi-like toxic masculinity that we've talked about?
I guess having a purpose, having a plan, having a vision of what I'm trying to do in my life, having projects that I'm working on. Like it talks in the book, say, about working on something that's for yourself or that's your real goal in life for at least 1 hour a day. So that's something that people can do, like writing a novel or whatever it is. That's one way.
Yeah, I agree with that. Just one of the chapters in the book is called if you don't know your purpose, discover it now. Basically just trying to picture where you want to be in 10 years or 30 years or something like that, and try to consciously aim towards that outcome. And then, it just, these kind of behavioral exercises and physical exercises that you can do to like raise your testosterone, and being in competitions, and as you said, Kurt, making a plan and sticking to it, making commitments and sticking to them, and trying to get stuff done. But also, like exercising, lifting heavy weights. And this goes back to what we were talking about with in our pickup artistry episode, just gaining life experience and being confident in yourself, and practicing getting better at stuff, like trying to set yourself on a trajectory where you're constantly improving, so that eventually you can be sort of an authority or a leader, and you can influence others positively.
Do you guys think there's something in the relationship between men and women that has an effect on testosterone?
Yes, I remember reading one article on a polyamory blog where it talked about the effect of, so it was talking about why people have affairs, and it was like when a man has an affair, his testosterone gets boosted. But it also went on to say that a man doesn't have to have an affair to get that kind of effect. So even if a man goes out and flirts with a waitress, has a compelling interaction with a woman, that's also going to boost his testosterone, and then he'll perhaps be more fulfilled in his relationship as a result, because he's still interacting with the world, I suppose. So I think that a lot of men don't know how to interact with women, and that probably negatively affects their testosterone as well.
Marriage and monogamous relationships in general decrease men's testosterone levels. There's probably ways around that, like Kurt mentioned, maybe flirting or maintaining that, like going out and dancing with other people, like maintaining an element of sexuality outside your relationship, even if you're not going to go so far as to have a non-monogamous relationship or cheat. But
yeah, well, and I don't think that, it sounds like a correlation that being in a marriage reduces testosterone. There's probably, I think David Deida would probably say, you don't need to go flirt with other women or, have an affair in order to, increase your masculinity or your sperm count or your testosterone or something like that. I think he would argue that, all you need to do is increase your polarity, the polarity in your relationship, and just start acting more masculine, and you should get a boost from that.
I was just going to say, I think if you're acting in a masculine way, like David Deida talks about, and relating to all people from that kind of place, that would be seen as flirting. Just whenever you interact with a woman could be seen as kind of a flirtatious interaction.
Right. Sometimes the line between being authentic with people and flirting with them isn't an obvious line.
One thing David Deida talks about too is withholding ejaculation, as masturbating to ejaculation doing it frequently reduces men's testosterone levels. Like they get a little jump, but then after that, if you're masturbating every day, then you can have less testosterone.
Yeah, he goes even further than that. He says like ejaculation, period, even if it's like real sex and not masturbation, reduces your motivation over time. So he's like, you should always, like, whenever, you should only choose to ejaculate. You should not just let it happen whenever it wants.
Yeah, I find that's true in my experience.
Yeah, that was a very interesting part of the book where he talks about like special techniques for avoiding finishing while you're having sex.
That's something that some men I know have said is beneficial. Seems to check out.
Do we want a new question, or are we still on this testosterone topic?
Seems like we're getting
turtle.
a little shy.
Yeah. awkward turtle.
I hold in my seed. What can I say?
Yeah. David Deida gets really into it, but it's some weird stuff.
It seems like with men, it seems like there's a thing where if they get energized, but then don't release, the energy builds within them. Like David Deida, or at least David Deida says so. He calls it like building up the masculine energy or whatever.
So I do want to remark on that. Like actually, so there's this movement on the internet called No Fap, where you're not supposed to masturbate. I don't know if I've ever I've never like interacted with people doing that. You know, people like have like they'll do it like socially, like, oh, like how long has it been since you masturbated? Oh, like a week or a month or however long. But just personally, I've noticed that if I don't masturbate for a while, I do get like this boost of motivation that helps me take risks. And he specifically says that in one of the chapters. He's basically like, yeah, like, well, it's the chapter we were talking about where he talks about like every time you ejaculate, it kind of like lowers your ability to take on the world. And so that actually rang true for me.
So didn't we have a debate about this several episodes ago? Like you and me, Ariel, and you were talking about a bunch of neurochemical effects of orgasm. Do you maybe want to touch on those?
Sure. I mean, I was mainly talking about the ones applying to females because we weren't specifically talking about male ejaculation, but with both sexes, you get a dopamine boost and then a subsequent dopamine, I don't know what you call it, a decline or bottoming out. So if you masturbate frequently, whether you're male or female, you get a little boost of dopamine, but then your overall dopamine levels when you're not masturbating or orgasming will be lower. And dopamine is important for motivation, for feeling, for learning new things, for feeling good when you accomplish things. It's just really important for being able to go out into the world and do things. So in that way, masturbation is similar to eating a lot of, not masturbate, orgasm. It's similar to anything that gives you a big dopamine boost. So those things should probably be done judiciously. And with men, there's all these other effects. Like we're talking about, there's a similar bump and then decline in testosterone. So men who masturbate frequently will have lower testosterone levels than men who don't. Orgasm at all. Like people who are really into like tantric stuff, like they don't orgasm. They just have sex without orgasming.
Yeah, it's almost like David Deida is arguing that like one of the core principles of masculinity is being kind of unmovable or unshakable in the face of great temptation. So like he even says at one point in the book, like, I knew this guy and, he was having sex with his wife or whatever. And she said like, I want you to finish. And so he did. And then she was like really unsatisfied afterwards. And he was like, but you told me to finish. And she was like, well, yeah, but she was still disappointed. Yes.
Yeah. She said, I told you to feel that you were strong enough not to.
Right, exactly. So it's like Deida is arguing that the masculine's, one of the masculine's jobs is to kind of stay the course, in the face of distraction or temptation. And the feminine's job is to provide all the distraction and temptation, which acts as a test to the masculine.
I would suggest that if you want to try that tactic on somebody, to probably talk about it beforehand.
Which tactic?
Oh, just this idea. The example in the book, it was specifically talking about the man finishing inside of her, which is a big risk for pregnancy and STDs and stuff like that. So like if you don't want somebody to come inside you, like don't tell them to, unless you talk about that beforehand, I would say.
Yeah, I think these are just two people who are in a steady relationship. I don't think it was like they just met or something.
I think part of the point of that chapter, she didn't really know what she wanted. But anyway, we've sort of already talked about this aspect of the book.
Oh, can I just mention really quickly one book which comes recommended to me on the subject is The Multi-Orgasmic Man by Mantak Chia.
That sounds fascinating. Would you like to elaborate on what that's about?
No, I haven't read the whole thing, so I just know my friends have told me it's a good book on the subject.
Oh, okay. I've never heard the term multiple orgasms in reference to men, so that seems, unless he's,
Oh, it's a thing.
We'll put it in the description, and if you want to, you can buy it.
Like men can have non-ejaculatory orgasms.
right, that's what he talks about in the ejaculate up your spine section. I'm not sure if that's the only way to do it, but yeah.
Okay, we'll have to talk about whether or not to keep in the whole ejaculation conversation.
Yeah.
That actually rhymes.
Bonus material.
Do we feel that following a program like David Deida's Way of the Superior Man could cause you to become inauthentic?
I guess anything could if you don't go about it the wrong way, but I think he is promoting authenticity in the people that follow his methods or his ideas.
Yeah, I think his method is vague enough that it maybe isn't even really a method. It's more just like a lens for viewing the world. And he does say, if you're like, the most masculine thing is to be authentic, is to really figure out what your purpose is and do that. And if you're trying to please other people, or if you're trying to do what you think is, the world is expecting of you or something like that, then that isn't the most masculine thing. So I would say, I would agree with Kurt and just say, yeah, if you're becoming more, if you're somehow, becoming less authentic after reading this book, then you're probably reading it wrong.
I would caution people with any program like this, but especially something that touches on like masculinity, and this book is called The Way of the Superior Man. Like, it's specifically placing a value system around this is how men should be. If you get caught up in that and are trying to emulate an image of a man, maybe you'll find that helps you discover your more true, authentic self. Maybe you'll discover that it doesn't really feel like you, and you're trying to fit an image because you've constructed an image in your mind of what masculinity should be. Just be careful about that. Like, I have seen some people who have read things like this, and then it seems like, as opposed to reacting authentically in a given situation, they're thinking about like, how should a strong man react in this situation? And I think it can lead you to disconnect from yourself a little bit. So I'm sure there's a right way to do it, but I think it would be easy to fall into a trap like that as well.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Reading this book and other sort of similar ideas where, kind of speaks to your masculinity, for me as a man, I feel like it is telling me these kind of deeper truths that I know to be true. But it just feels like the way that I was raised to almost be like more feminine. And when I read things like this, that's like speak to the masculine and say like, hey, this is what a man would do, are a lot of times, they're telling me things that I wasn't raised to do, but that I nevertheless know somewhere deep down is what I should be doing. And I don't know what to make of that, but obviously, trying these things, as we talked about in our pickup artistry episode, the process of discovering who you are is an iterative process. So, you could try something and later evaluate and say, oh, wow, that totally felt fake. I'm not going to do that again. Or you could try something and you could be like, wow, that felt really right. I'm definitely going to do that more. So I think from that angle, this book is more helpful than harmful, at least for people with a masculine essence.
What do you think, Ariel?
Yeah, I can see elements of truth in what you're both saying. Like, I feel like this is like all self-help programs kind of encourage you to develop one side of your personality over other sides, which is in some ways bound to be inauthentic, but also Well, not necessarily, I guess. I guess the ways it could be authentic is if you're, or I guess the way it could be authentic is if you're really inspired by the program, you find the parts in yourself that already exist with that match of the program, and then you develop those parts of yourself and let them bloom and grow. And I guess abandon parts of yourself that don't. And to some extent, that's necessary. That's a necessary part of life, because that's what changes. Like, change is developing certain parts of yourself and not developing others. So I can see how it could be done authentically. Where I can see it being inauthentic is kind of where you talk about, like, if someone, instead of finding the place within themselves where this feels true, like Chris is describing, where instead they construct like an idea of like an ideal man and try to live up to it. Or if they, like, I feel like in pickup artistry a lot, like I feel like those programs are often maybe a little bit more geared towards an authenticity than this, because it seems like there's often scripts, and they, if you go out, and we don't need to get into a whole debate about pickup artistry. If you want to check it out, you can check out our episode about it, which will be in the description. But I feel like, you know, if you're just like, okay, the ideal man would say, the superior man would say this, this, and this, and this, and then I got to go out and do that. Or I got to go out and act tough, even though that's not really what my authentic expression of masculinity would be. I could see it. I could see people being susceptible to that reading this as well.
Well, yeah, and as maybe the discussion on the discussion a while ago when we were talking about how the feminine communicates and approaches the world. If you're a man and you're unsure of what you want, then maybe that's you're kind of living in a sort of more feminine energy at that point, and it's kind of counterintuitive to think about, but you might there might be a particular action that you can take which will actually be more authentic and make you feel better in the long run, or even the short run, than whatever action you were kind of feeling like doing at the moment. And so, yeah, so something that maybe when you do it doesn't feel like it's going to be authentic, but then you do it anyway, and then it feels really authentic. I think such a thing is possible. Yeah,
Deida would probably say that it's an expression of the masculine to decide who you want to be and then try to become that person. And it's an expression of the feminine to just be with however you are.
Absolutely. Another dichotomy we could name is the being versus becoming dichotomy. I would say being aligns more with female or feminine, and becoming aligns more with masculine.
I suppose we talked a little bit historically too, and you guys pointing that out makes me think a lot about how kids have been raised in different generations. And I feel like when I was growing up, the emphasis was 100% on the being, on accepting yourself, on being yourself, on being true to yourself, on not letting bullies or anyone get you down about who you are. And I think that those things are good, but there wasn't much emphasis at all on cultivating certain skills or traits or improving certain things about yourself.
And that might be why the millennial generation is finding it so hard to achieve things.
Perhaps, yeah, because to many people in our generation, I think the very idea that like you should try to change something about yourself in order to be more successful is kind of anti self-acceptance.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. It makes me think of like bringing it back to our previous discussion. Like maybe there are ways that you can change yourself, or ways that you can decide to change yourself, which end up actually being more authentic than just kind of trying to stay who you are for all time.
Absolutely. Well, and my perspective on this is I think that human beings and personalities are developed over time. I don't think there is a like who you are. I mean, there kind of is a who you are, and you know, everybody, even babies have different personalities to an extent, but in my view, who you are is a combination of your experiences and your influences and your genetics and how those things have compounded to create and develop your personality and who you are over time. And I don't think that there's anything inauthentic about or bad about like consciously trying to influence the direction of how you develop, as long as you actually internalize it.
I don't know. I mean, I feel like there's a truth to that. Like maybe at the base of things, there is like the eternal and divine nothingness, but there's also a sense that like you can't just be anybody. Like I couldn't just, if I just came to the podcast and started like being Chris, it wouldn't land probably as well as me coming to the podcast and being me. Like there's something about authenticity that's like,
I'd like to see you try being me on the podcast.
But let's do a different hypothetical. Like you as you are couldn't just be Chris and have it be authentic. But let's say you as you are for some reason decided that you just really, really, really wanted to be like Chris, and you felt that that was like those were the personality traits that you would feel best in, and you set out on like a 10-year program to cultivate.
Or let's put it a different way. Like
now.
Let's put it differently. Like maybe you want to become a good cook, okay? And so you don't have those skills yet because you don't have the practice and the experience. But you can certainly get the practice and experience, and put yourself in that path and direct yourself towards I'm going to be a good cook someday. And so the way that you do that is at first you take other people's recipes, things that other people have already told you work. And then you apply those and you try to, you start having some success, and the more you gain experience, the more you gain knowledge and confidence. And eventually you become, basically you're not using other people's recipes anymore. Eventually it just becomes a part of you because you have the requisite experience to figure out what's going to be good. Mm-hmm. And so at that point, being a good cook is a part of your personality. Whereas before it was this kind of, aspiration that you had.
Well, it's like I'm growing a new branch of the tree, but I'm not becoming a different tree. Do you guys understand?
Yeah, you can never become a completely different tree, but I think that you can change the form so much that you might seem like a completely different tree. But it's always growing from the same roots. Like, I want to become a good cook is one analogy that we could use, but we could also use a different one. Like, what if I want to become patient? I'm an impatient person and I want to become patient. I still have to work with my roots of my personality and where I'm coming from and develop patience as a skill. And I might never be as patient as someone who came from very patient roots and never had to work on it at all, or never as patient as someone who came from very patient roots and then developed it completely and became the most patient person in the world. But I would never tell a person that you couldn't become patient. I think if you really want to become a patient person and you really work on that, you certainly can.
So one thing that Katie and Ariel said about the millennials having difficulty moving away from self-acceptance or deciding to change themselves. I do think that changing oneself is still a relatively new idea. So How to Win Friends and Influence People, which was probably the first popular self-development or self-help book, it was released in 1934. So it's still a pretty new idea. And I think a lot of people have this idea of themselves like, that's just who I am, and I won't be able to change. And that's probably existed for probably all of human history. So maybe humans are still growing into that.
But on the flip side, people always had an idea of raising children to be a certain way.
Yes, that's true. But that seems to be a very different thing. Well, in key ways, it's very different to changing yourself, because a child is somebody new. They're a new person, and you expect to be able to mold them for some reason.
True. Well, or for example, like what about military training and the process that people go through when they go through military training?
Yeah, that's true. That's a good counterexample.
I mean, I feel like the field of self-improvement is pretty new, but the idea of self-improvement is very old. Like you even find it in like Socrates and the Buddha and Jesus Christ.
Yeah, that's true. But it's a question of how popular it is, how widely dispersed it is among culture.
What flavor of ice cream does the Way of the Superior Man remind you of?
Can it be like chocolate nut crunch?
I would say that David Data's Superior Man is definitely not vanilla.
Okay.
Yeah, I think definitely chocolate in there somewhere because it's dark, but it also makes women feel great.
I just want to note that Katie listened to the audiobook version, which had some exercises which she said seemed to be related to dominance and submission or BDSM.
Yes.
On that note, thank you all for coming and for coming on this journey with us. This has been a very fun episode. And if you like this content, please like, subscribe, leave us a review, and so on and so forth. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks for joining us on the Multiversity Project. We hope you found this episode both mind-bending and enjoyable.
We can be found all over the social media space and at multiversitypodcast.com.
If you like this content, give us a like, comment, follow, share, or support us on Patreon.
Catch you on the flip side.